Okay, it's recording. Sorry
All
about
right.
that.
Okay.
All right.
Put
Can
it in
everybody
speaker view
hear
so we
me?
can get Jennifer. Everyone mute, and then Miriam, put your recording in speaker view so we'll get a.
Oh, speaker view. Okay, got it.
All right. Are we all set? Two thumbs up. Very good. Very good. Well, I have to say I've been really looking forward to this, and I have to give a shout out to Jonathan because this was originally one of the 5 minute ones, and Jonathan kind of said, "Hey, this would be a good presentation." So it forced me to kind of zoom out a little bit and think more broadly about how I teach my students, composition, and not just my composition students, but just I think it's important for all students to try at least a little bit to compose. And I guess one of the challenges already it's very hard to talk about composition because I think students tend to think, oh, that's like theory stuff. Somehow it gets pushed into that category when um, a lot of students they think theory is boring or whatever. And uh, Carol, I remember she showed me one of her books that said she said, "Oh, I put in front of that fun theory book." You know, and I really liked that because I think it's often the connotations with that. So maybe I have a little handout here. I thought if you wanted to write along in there with that, it always helps me to have something to work off of. So um, I do want to talk about composition versus improvisation. They are very connected, but also very different. Going to talk about sort of the three things needed for composition, and then I'll talk about some strategies for teaching. But I think first of all is it's interesting. I find that a lot of my students are almost very shy to even if they compose at home or they improvise at home. Once they get to the piano studio in front of me, sometimes they're almost embarrassed in a way, like to show what they've. I don't know if anyone else has found that to be true, where it's like, yeah, they're really reluctant. Like they don't even show mom or dad. It's like their little thing, their little secret. They don't want to share what they're composing. So a lot of it is just, kind of gradually, getting them to feel more comfortable. And we'll talk about some of those practice strategies. It's funny though, even my composition students, sometimes they'll write very little down, which can be frustrating if, they have a lesson once every 2 weeks. I have a high school student that he's brilliant, but he'll write down 2 lines and I'll say, okay, well, here's a lot of things you can do. He has 2 hour lessons. And then 2 weeks later, he wrote down 2 more measures, and
Oh,
it's kind of like, okay. Um, so, well, again, we'll talk a little bit about those things as well. And I think a lot of it is just getting the content written down. I remember I met Lowell Lieberman once and I said, what's just one piece of advice you have for a young composer? And he said, just get the content down because if it's just an idea, you have nothing to work with. So even if it's a bad idea or even if you don't like it 100%, just having that down so you have something to mold and transform. And I just want to show this little video here. It's very short, which from the sagacious and wise Mr. Rogers. I just wanted to show this here. I think it gives us a lot of insight into the creative process. Let's see if I can do this. Share screen. All right. Hopefully everybody can hear this.
Now, I wouldn't have made that if I'd just been thinking about it. Just pretending about it, it wouldn't be there. You can make believe it happens, or pretend that something's true. You can wish or hope or contemplate a thing you'd like to do. But until you start to do it, you will never see it through. 'Cause the make-believe pretending just won't do it for you. You've got to do it. Every little bit, you've got to do it. Do it, do it, do it. And when you're through, you can know who did it. 'Cause you did it. You did it. You did it. That's right. And it feels good to do things.
I thought that was really, it really warmed my heart, and there's a lot of truth in that. I still, Mr. Rogers is one of my heroes, and I think it's, again, he's pointing out that having something written down, even though that's a picture, it's those kind of things can be inspiring too. Just sending a clip like that to a student can just, they start to think differently. So I just wanted to share that little gem there. I thought that was really neat. So let's talk a little bit about, and as I go through, I really want people to ask questions and comment, and what are their experiences, because a lot of you have been teaching a lot longer than me, so I want to hear from you too. And so please feel free to comment and ask questions in the chat or raise your hand. So I'm going to throw out a question. What is the difference between improvisation versus composing? I want to hear from you first. Felicia, yeah.
Process of writing it down.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
I like to call improvisation doodling, because when the lights go out and you have no power, you can go sit down at the piano, and it's really amazing what sounds you create. But do you remember them? No way. But it's fun because you're doodling and you're moving across the keyboard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, musical doodles. I like it.
Composing, you're taking an idea and putting it into a framework, and where you have to be organized. And sometimes I don't like to be organized.
Yeah, I think of improvisation as very spontaneous, whereas composition requires some forethought.
Mm-hmm.
I think of improvisation as a way of thinking, and composing as a way of writing something down, working with what you see on the paper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I don't know how to improvise.
Yeah, and I think I like what Susan pointed out about spontaneous, and I think improvising is very much like spontaneous composition in a way. And that can also be a group activity, which is like improvisation with jazz groups and stuff. And last February I think someone's not muted. I'm hearing a little feedback. I don't know if that's better. I don't know what that was. Thank you, whoever that was. Last February, it was my first time playing in like a jazz quartet, and I was just struck by I was so nervous to play because I'm so used to having everything written down, like I know the memory markers and all this stuff. But then I was in a situation where people would just kind of like look at you and, hey, it's your turn. You start to improvise. Now I was used to doing that on my own, but that's a whole nother thing, which improvisation can be really wonderful for connecting with people and learning to let loose a little bit. So yeah, spontaneous versus kind of instant composition. Composing is more of a craft. It requires editing and reflection and thought, and in a way, I hate to say more discipline, but you can sit down and write one measure, and then it's like, oh, I'm tired, and then it requires too much. I'm thinking about a lot of my students. It's one measure, and then the next week it's like, oh, well, I didn't do that because it was too difficult. And whereas improvisation, not a whole lot of editing, and you're always looking ahead. It's kind of like keeping it's happening in real time. It's kind of like just keeping the train on the tracks. So when it comes to learning composition, I read an article and it said, is teaching composition like chasing a dream? Like, how do you teach that? Because there are some things that are more difficult to learn than others. So which skills that composers have that they possess that are intrinsic? I think everybody has a certain amount of creativity. That doesn't mean that they feel inspired all the time. And so I think that's the part of it that requires discipline. So I think the three things that I would kind of came up with was the things needed is definitely, your skill set, and that's learning to read music, notation, theory, those kinds of things. And I think discipline goes along with those skills. Creativity and inspiration is kind of the second one. I think those are linked. That's why I put those in the same category. And then connection to people around us. I think connection to the composers, it's, some students get really excited that they can be like Beethoven, they can be like Chopin. So they feel this connection with other composers. I see Anne raised her hand and has a question. Yes. Does Anne have a question? She raised her hand. You have to unmute. Or maybe you could type it in the chat for me. All right. Well, and maybe you can type that in the chat if you have the question there. I see that you raised your hand, or maybe that was a mistake. So skills, learning to read and understand music notation. Of course, that's different for each level, and for younger students, of course, there's a little bit more of a barrier there. It's a lot of things to write, and as I said, they think theory can be a little bit boring. So the first step is getting them a basic understanding of notation and theory. You can compose without that, but growing as a composer will be kind of short-lived with that. And then the discipline part, is it's hard to teach discipline, to your students. It's even hard to get them to practice every week. So the commitment from the teacher, I think, is important too. I wish more of my students had 45-minute lessons, so that way we could spend a good, at least healthy 5-10 minutes on composing. I have a few students that take separate composition lessons. Of course, that depends on the family and everything, but I think that's important to try to incorporate that. And then also consistency, just like practice. If you only do composition exercises with the students once every 2 months, it's not going to be as fruitful as if you did it every week. And even if it's just a measure a week, 2 measures a week, even that can be helpful. I'm just checking the chat there. Okay, yes. Any questions again, or any comments in the chat? And then the creativity, inspiration, I think, is a massive question. That could be a whole presentation in and of itself. And so how would you define creativity? I want to hear from you. How do you define creativity? Because it's a massive subject. What are some thoughts?
Well, I think it definitely involves being able to think outside of the box sometimes, which I think is hard for me at times.
Definitely, yeah.
And maybe not worrying about pleasing somebody, and not worrying about what other people will think. It takes courage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. That's a big one.
I often tell my students not to be, hope I won't offend anyone's sensibilities, but what's the difference between a rock star and an artist? An artist isn't obsessed with what everyone thinks.
I like that.
They have a vision, and they're true to it, and they stick to it, and they realize that it'll please some people and it won't please others. But they take security in having faith in their vision, rather than having a need to get immediate acceptance.
I think that's a big one. Yeah.
And that goes against everything in our education system. Coming from
I think that's an important point.
Mm-hmm. There's a way to not care too much without what everyone thinks, without having to be an out rebel. You can live a normal life, and you can follow the rules and not go to prison without worrying about what everyone thinks every minute of the day.
I think that's a great point, and I think that's one thing that's important for students, that it helps nourish their sense of the individualism that they have, and each child is so different, has so much to offer, and like you said, that we don't get a whole lot of that. It's always kind of groups instead of, and that's great. It's wonderful, but that's what I love about trying to teach composition, is you find that the students, that's one reason why I think they're kind of embarrassed at first to show, because they're bearing their soul, right? And they're not used to doing that. So I like, that's a really good point. Yeah.
I think a lot of kids are afraid to take the first step, because I've used the tool, what is it called? It's a toolkit for composition, which is kind of a fun series. I've used the Written by Me series. And I've been when kids say, I want to write something, I'll say, well, let's do that. And you give them a book that has a step-by-step guide, and they don't want anything to do with that. All of a sudden you give them an assignment, and I'm not going to do that because it's theory. And I think somewhere along the line, we've got to be able to draw a line between what is theory and what is allowing yourself to freely think. And I don't know the answer to that. I had one student who was a senior boy 2 years ago that sat down and played an improv at his senior recital that blew your socks off. You never could get him to write anything down. But I think underlying it was that he did not trust himself to write. He had very poor penmanship when you saw him write. And I think that there comes a line between comfort zone and lack of. But this kid would come in for years, sit down and play something. And I'd say, okay, now that you've got that out of your system, let's go do the lesson. But it was really a tough bit with him because he was so gifted and yet trying to break through. And how do you break through the wall? Number one step of getting them to accept what you are giving them. Mm-hmm. I'm all ears for what people, how do you get the person who wants to make up a piece of music, compose, to actually honor your suggestions and do the work?
Yeah. I think those are all really great questions, and they're questions that don't go away. I mean, I'm certainly looking forward to sharing these strategies with you, but again, each student's going to be different in the way they approach things. And a lot of students sort of develop their own language in a way when they write things down. I didn't write a whole lot of stuff down when I first started composing. I was pretty little, but I would draw pictures and things like that, and my teacher couldn't, it was like, but so yeah, and then the last thing, Deborah, is a question.
It's not a question. I just wanted to add to your question about creativity. So in my personal view, I think creativity is just simply rearranging things that are already in existence and putting them in a new way that's specific to your feelings about it. I don't think it necessarily has to be completely new and innovative. As a matter of fact, I don't think there really is anything really new and innovative in this world. I think we can kind of go in a different direction, but it's just a matter of rearranging things that are here. For example, Stravinsky, he created atonality. However, atonality always existed. It wasn't just something that he put together. It was always there, but he rethought it in a different way.
Yeah, I like your idea about it doesn't have to be like completely new, right? And that's why I think sometimes starting with a piece the student really likes, and then you can have them do variations on it or something like that. I think is a great point. Yeah, I like those points.
I meant Schoenberg. Sorry, Elaine.
Oh, that's
One thing I would say about improvisation, I'm amazed at what exists now compared to when I was growing up. The technology, if the student were to invest in a program like Finale, if they're playing something that has a discernible pulse, they can set up the transcription tool and it will capture their improvisation and notation. It won't be perfect, but it'll be good enough that if you wanted to come back to it and really work on it, you'd have a reasonable representation of what you did. Then there's also just simply turning on your recorder, and a good exercise is, can you find a way to notate or dictate what you wrote, what you played?
Yeah, it's incredible, right? Yeah, I mean, you could voice memo. There you go, and you listen back, and there are so many more things that we have now we didn't even have 10 years ago. Yeah. Yeah, good. So the last point there, that what's needed is like I said, connection. I think that's was a nice segue into what Deborah was saying about, they're, rearranging things that have already been done. So it's important that students get to know the great composers, that they, look at pieces of music in depth, not just play them, to actually study what makes a great melody. We'll talk a little bit about that. Instead of just, people say, oh, I like that piece. Well, why do you like that piece? Well, it sounds nice, or it sounds like this. Digging into the details can be a really exciting thing. I think the kind of the most important out of those three, I'd say, was really just, it really is the discipline, though, just sitting down and doing it like Mr. Roger was saying, So that being said, I see you have those little handouts there, and I want to take a look at, I'm going to talk a little bit first about elementary students. And of course there's elementary students and there's elementary, school students, but I'm thinking about the earlier ages specifically right now. And the first one I want to show you is the little faces. This is a graphic score. If you have that there, I could actually just show on the screen too. That might be helpful. Let's see. Let's see. Give me 1 second here. It's not showing.
I have it up. Would you like me to share it?
Yeah, that'd be
I
great.
just did
Yeah,
that
that'd
as
be
a
great,
backup.
Jonathan. Thank you. Yeah.
All right, let me do that. I just had it ready just in case we needed
Awesome.
it.
Thank you. Yes. Tech extraordinaire. That's helpful. Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think the first strategy is using graphic scores. Now, I didn't even know what a graphic score was until I was at Peabody, and I don't think graphic scores have to be very complicated or anything like that. But this is a good way to even just introduce notation without them even knowing. It's kind of like getting the kids to eat the vegetables. You put it in, something that tastes really good. So the first one, right, you get 3 smiley faces that could draw that. Now that could be anything. It could be single notes, right? Or you could say, okay, what does each smiley face mean? Does it mean, obviously it's going up, so already they're getting a sense of linear, what's going up. And the treble clef, you have them right there, that indicates that, hey, it's the right hand. So already they're learning how to draw a treble clef. And then of course the bass clef, they're learning how to draw a bass clef. And you could have them do this, or you could just put it in front of them and show them and then say, now it's your turn, right? So this one could be starting here and then just single notes, if you're talking about really early elementary kids. And then you can make it more complex. You could add flats to it. Because you notice the last one, his mouth is open, so maybe it's not quite as, or maybe they add 3 notes, right? And of course that's maybe not the most wonderful thing for mom and dad to hear at home, if it's just little notes here and there, but it's giving them a sense of music notation, even if it's just smiley faces. The last one, right, you're using both hands and it's going back and forth. Maybe you're up here and then low note, and then they're back together because they have 2 smiley faces up and down. And you can do more with that, right? You can start to write in like a line, and you can show, hey, this is where middle C is at. And that's something that, those early, some of the piano adventures, they use graphic, scores in a way just to teach how to play pieces of music and to make it more fun. So that's one thing you can do. Yeah, Deb has a question. She raised her hand, I think.
I didn't mean to do that. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Okay. So that's one thing. Graphic score is there. And then look at the next one. And this is, you can give the students this, showing where middle C is at. And what you could do is you could actually draw a line to show, you're going up, you're going down, and you're always, and you could even start, if you want to start to introduce the idea of that's a tonic, that's your home note, you could even do that. You're starting middle C, and then you say, okay, you can use any note in a 5-finger scale, but you have to come back down to C. Because you always want to come back home when you're on vacation. And then the second one, you can say, well, you're on vacation, you're away from C, right? So you're starting up here. You can start on this G or a high G up here. You could even do something like, okay, even like that. And again, you're just giving them ways to be creative. And then the last one, is a ghost. What does a ghost sound like, right? And a lot of kids will probably play down here, but you could start on low C, and then you say, okay, how do we get up to heaven with the angels? You're going up, and you want to end up on the highest C on the piano. So that's just, graphic scores can be really fun, and that way it engages their creative mind as well, or their more visual artistic mind as well. And that way, because little kids really do like to draw things. And so I thought that would be a fun strategy, is to use graphic scores. So that's kind of the first thing with the elementary students. And like I said, the great thing too about that is you can kind of start to incorporate more and more music notation. You can start to incorporate rhythms by just where the distance from the notes. are. And then the second thing is using lyrics to help, and that's the next one here. And I got this online. I thought it was pretty cool. And with this one, you know, kids usually like ice cream, and they have what scale are you on? Are you doing a G 5-finger scale? Are you doing D? C? You can choose whatever scale, and that way you can also teach them your 5-finger scales, and they can use that while composing at the same time. And then it's always helpful. You can write, you know, what your thumb is on, and you don't have to use letter numbers. You don't have to use letters, not letter numbers. You don't have to use letters. You could use finger numbers instead. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 3, 3, 3. You can write in those numbers, or you can write in the letters. And you know, I like how a lot of that's one reason I like the Faber books is that they use lyrics, and the kids, a lot of them, they do like to sing, which is great. So that's another example. You can find these. I got these on eartrainingandimprov.com, and they have lots of really neat worksheets and things like that. There are so many resources that are already out there. You wouldn't have to spend a lot of time to create this really nice looking pages for that. So that's another thing, using lyrics. And you could even have them compose their own lyrics. You know, what's something that they like to do? They like to go to the park. They like to have piano lessons on Zoom, whatever it is. Yeah. Miriam, yeah.
So I have a question. Where did you say you can get these types of things so we don't have to invent the wheel?
Yeah, it's this one's eartrainingandimprov.com. I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah, eartrainingandimprov.com. I think I spelled that all right there. So yeah, so there are so many resources out there, and that's one of them. Good, nice. And we don't have to share this screen anymore right now, Jonathan. We can come back to that. And then another strategy is, and of course I think a lot of you probably already do this with improvising, having the student improvise, not necessarily compose. But using those 5-finger patterns as anchors. So say, okay, you know, let's improvise in a minor 5-finger scale. So they can do anything within that 5-finger scale. And for also doing duets, this can be really fun if, you know, the teacher's playing, you know, doing whatever down here, and the student can just play whatever they want up here. And just having them, you know, utilize that part of the brain, right? They're creating something, and also they're having fun with their teacher while doing it. You could even do that on with virtual lessons. Of course, the timing is going to be off, but what I do when I'm playing duets with my students, I just have to zone out and just realize that it's going to be off from my end, but on their end it's good. So I just have to count us in, and then they start. It sounds like a little later, but it's right on. So so you can even do that virtually if you can kind of stand that offbeat thing. I guess it would be a good exercise anyway to focus, you know. So that can be helpful, improvising with what I call those pattern anchors with that. And then you can also introduce, the left hand does pretty well with just fifths, and even with little hands, it's not, they don't have to be that big to play the 5-finger scales. And then some of them will really like to move between. And so that's, again, a little more improvisation, but it's starting to kind of nourish their interest there and just kind of massage that part of the brain in a way to start to work. And then I don't know, how many people have used GarageBand with their students as a creative tool? Anyone? Yeah, I know. Yeah, Deborah Roger, this composition workshop that you do is just awesome. I just marvel at how many different things you had the students do. So thumbs up with that. So I thought, for fun, I just wanted to show you, they changed a few things in GarageBand from when I used to use it when I was a teenager, but I'm going to share the screen here and just kind of walk you through a few fun things you could do with the student. Is it going to let me share my screen with GarageBand? Let's see. You
should be able to. We made you a co-host.
Yeah.
Do you have a share screen icon?
Yeah.
Okay,
Here
there
we
you
go.
go.
All right, everybody can see that, hopefully? Awesome, cool. All right, so yeah, so it looks pretty complicated, but you know, the great thing is that these kids really are savvy. You know, it's a little scary how, you know, I have my 7-year-old student teaching me how to do something on my iPhone. It's like, oh my gosh. So this is something that they can use to, again, you know, start to improvise, to get a little interested, and that this can be elementary or intermediate or advanced students in terms of their level. And you can do a lot of different things on this. I'm not going to go through all of it, but I just thought I would show you some of the things you could do. So they have all these different loops, okay? And there's hundreds of these things that you can listen to, and they range from like just simple piano sounds to fun beats to rock stuff and pop stuff and everything in between. So just listening to this one, let's see, it's top down piano 1. Let's see what this sounds like. So I have that looping right now, same thing. And you can say, okay, can you find those keys in the piano? First of all, okay. And that can be good, that's a good ear training thing too. At the same time, they're learning to kind of imitate what they hear. Kind of sounds like the Godfather theme, a little weird, a little creepy. But anyway, so you can have them, you'll play this in the background, right? And you say, okay, now you can play any note in a harmonic minor scale, right? Because that seems to be what's being played. And then up here, you get to change the key if you want, which can be really helpful too. I really like that feature on here. You can change the key, you can change how fast it is. Really, really neat stuff. So let's say, you know, this is playing. You can have them play. So they can have a lot of fun with that kind of stuff in their lessons. And then, of course, a lot of the kids have the Apple stuff. They have their, I don't know if, Deb, do you know if this is, you can use it on your iPhone? Is that on the iPhone, the GarageBand app? Yeah? Okay, Jonathan's nodding. Oh, that's great. So they could even bring their iPhone and you could start to, you know, work on a project together. And you could...
I've never used it on the iPhone, but I've used it on the iPad. The iPad is a little bit different. It works a little bit different than the computer version.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
But it is possible.
Okay, great. Yeah, so that's another thing you can do. And then you can start to get really creative with the beats and everything, and they start to hear different chords like this one, Blue Street Guitar. Whoops, we don't want that. Let's move over here. And this is all part of the same project, so that's kind of neat. So let's say, again, same key. And then you got some students that are really going to go to town. They're going to start to add new rhythms. You know, I'm adding blueprint beat, chronograph set beat, and it can get pretty fancy pretty quickly. You know. So there's your background. They can play, you know. So again, it's sort of more improvisation, but that's just, you know, some of the things you can do, and it can be pretty fun too for the teacher. Yeah, Miriam.
So those are preset sounds. Like you didn't create those sounds. They were already in GarageBand.
Yeah, which is awesome. And they got all the things I'm scrolling through over here. This all sounds that they already have. You can try them out. So yeah, so of course for the student that's a little all over the place, they can really, you know, just spend a long time on that. But just even introducing it to them at their lessons, if they don't already know it about it, a lot of the students already know a little bit about GarageBand. But yeah, so lots of pre-recorded sounds. Mm-hmm.
Since it's since they're actually not creating the sounds, I guess it's still composition because they're putting sounds together.
Yeah, I think it's because they're learning a little bit more about the rhythms, right? And then you could also use that as a bouncing off point for, okay, well, let's figure out what that rhythm is. And you can start to notate it that way. Probably not elementary level, but, you know, intermediate level, you can start to, okay, well, here's the rhythm. Now let's try to write that rhythm down on the page. Yeah, so it's pretty fun, and they keep changing stuff and adding more stuff to it, of course. That's the challenge, right, of this day and age, is everything keeps changing all the time. But a lot of options. Like I said, you can change the key, you can change the tempo, you can loop things. more so, do this is just loops the same thing over and over again. And then they can record it. They can record what they play, and they can send that to you with the little record button. They can record what they're actually playing on the piano. You can also hook it up to the MIDI keyboard or whatnot. But so that's the idea with GarageBand. That can be a good technique for, again, for the younger ones. There are some other good apps out there. I'm sure a lot of you probably know more about them than I do. There's I looked up one of the other apps. Oh, I'm missing my notes on the apps. I can send those out, but let's do that. Sue posted the GarageBand on PC. Oh, great! So that you can do GarageBand on your Windows, which would be that's nice to know. That's a possibility. So that's for like the younger ones, right? So your graphic scores, using 5-finger patterns as an anchor. And then using apps like GarageBand, which is a little more about improvisation. So moving on to sort of more intermediate students, I'm going to talk just a little bit about some software that you can use for music notation. I guess the big two are Finale and Sibelius. Now those are pretty expensive, right? So unless it's a student that's really invested in composing, or unless the family has plenty of resources financially, they might not want to jump right in and get those. But Finale Notepad works really well. That's for Windows only. So that's one issue with that. But I'm going to show you NoteFlight. Aha! Sue beat me to it. You beat me to it, Sue. NoteFlight is free. Yes. And I'll just show you how NoteFlight works. Really, really great. Let me... a lot of my students at Cecil College actually use NoteFlight. They also use MuseScore as well. Let's see if I can do this. Oh, there's Mr. Rogers. All right. So here's NoteFlight. Okay, and it's really easy. You get your email, you get your password. The kids will be able to figure that out quickly. Create your new score. Start from blank score. You can import MIDI files, which is pretty neat. So here you go, and it has all the features up here. You got your sharps, your flats, all your music notation, and it's sort of click as you go, which can be really a lot easier for the student because they can hear it as it's going, and you can also play it back, which is great. So it's very user friendly, which is nice. And it's free, which is also great. And you can change rhythms, you can add text, you can add your dynamics. So this is a really good resource if the student doesn't want to spend a whole lot of money, but you want them to start actually making the music look really good and to notate it that way rather than by hand. I've had, honestly, not a whole lot of success with getting my intermediate students to write things by hand as hard as I try. And I can't really criticize because that's what I do. I don't write by hand much anymore, just because it's an extra step in the process. And my goal is to get stuff written down as quickly as possible. And oftentimes that's just, getting the stuff down. I think free up to 10 scores. Oh, okay. That throws a wrench in it. So apparently, NoteFlight is free up to 10 scores. Well, I guess you could choose the same file or the same document. There's always ways to cut corners with these things. So you could just have the same file and add double bar lines, but you can download and keep. This is great. Wonderful. So thank you for all those comments. That's great. So that's your music notation stuff that's free. I can show you Finale, which is what I use. Let me share my screen here. Good old Finale over here. And let's see what I have. This is the New World Symphony. Finale's, it's got a lot more stuff. You can use what's called the Hyperscribe tool, which is what Jonathan, I think, was talking about with, you can play into the, if you've got a MIDI keyboard, you can play into it, and it's going to basically write out what you have. I was thinking I might be able to do that today, but getting the keyboard and all that would have been too tricky. So you can do that, and there's all of these different options, but that's just what Finale looks like. I thought I would show you what that looks like. I think it doesn't take a whole lot of time to figure out how the things work. You got your music notation up here, dynamics, phrasing, legato, all that good stuff. So that's what I use now. I think Jonathan, you said you use Sibelius and Finale.
I've used Finale for 30 years.
Oh, great! Yeah, I think it's pretty easy to use, more or less, and I really enjoy it. So, Deb Rogers says you can hyperscribe with Noteflight too. Fantastic! Yeah,
Great.
Yeah,
That's
and you
good
just
to
with
know.
those ones, I guess you want to make sure you set the kind of 16th notes will be the fastest notes, because otherwise you're gonna have 128th rest, and then things are looking wonky and everything. It can be pretty entertaining though. The students, I had one student that really liked to show me how complicated it was, because he used hyperscribe and it had all these really strange rests and notes in there. So that's your notation apps.
Jen, I have a question.
Yeah.
I used to do this when I taught AP Music Theory at high school, but like you mentioned, it's getting harder and harder to get people to write things by hand. I originally taught my students to first write by hand because back when I was teaching AP Theory, sometimes the notation programs would do weird thing, and by kind of learning the rules about how things were to look, they use the software better, although that's become, I guess, more and more unnecessary because the algorithms have gotten better. But what place does writing things down by hand have in your teaching, or does it?
Yeah, I like I said before, most of it I have the kids, they get Noteflight or Finale Notepad. But I do have students, especially if they're first starting out, I do have them start with just writing things down. And what I'll actually do is I'll print out a blank Finale page, and then I'll have them write stuff in, and then I'll actually show them Finale on my computer and say, oh, look, we're going to compose with Miss Jennifer's computer. We'll add some stuff each week. And then they get pretty excited about that because they're like, oh, it looks professional, because somehow it's the equivalency now is like, oh, if I write it down, it's not professional. I guess, it doesn't look as nice. Yeah, I don't, that's just kind of that seems to be a pattern I've noticed with, they say, well, it's not the same. Look at your music, Miss Jennifer. It's like, that's not helpful,
Well,
so that's where I'll start. I might give them a page, and then we'll work on it together and add some stuff each week. Requires a little more printing off, but it can help boost their confidence a little bit, I guess, to see it on Finale if they don't have it, or if they don't have notation. Yeah.
The one thing that I noticed when I have had students that have been composing, and I think I notice it in a lot of the music that's being composed today, the one disadvantage of composing on a computer is you're looking at one screen at a time.
Yes.
I mean, I have memories when I was an undergraduate and I was a composition major. I have memories of putting the sheets all around my room, and every time I made a move, I knew where I was in the form.
I love that.
You can't really do, I know I went to a master class with John Corigliano at Juilliard, and he would have his students actually just make graphic sketches that had no notation. He wanted to know, what's the line of your piece?
Wow.
Where does it climax? Does this need to be there? Does this work? Do you want continuity or do you want discontinuity? And he would actually make his students make visual representations of his pieces, because he said, if they're, he said, I have to see where it's going. That's one aesthetic. Not everyone shares that. I realize that.
I
That's
think
just the one thing.
I think that's really important, and I do with my more advanced composition students. I learned this from David Brown. He was insistent that everything had to be connected, which eventually I understood. At first I didn't like it. It was like, what do you mean? Oh, this is connected. It's like, oh, that's a second there, that's connected, and it's you get so married to your material, right? And so what he had me do is print out all the pages and put them in a circle on the floor. He said, all right, where did that come from? I was like, oh, I don't know, so I think that's really good. And that can be, especially with the advanced students, it's important that they see the overall shape and form. Where is the trajectory? Where is it going? I think I loved my teacher at Peabody, Judah Adachi, but he really wasn't big on form, and I do think my composition sort of suffered a little bit during that time. I actually stopped composing for about 2 years. So that's a whole nother story. But anyway, I think that's a great point. What you brought up, Jonathan, is I think it still is important to write things down physically and let's see, what comes first, the notes, the harmony, the lyrics, the chicken or the egg? That's a great question. And for some students, right, they will gravitate towards lyrics. They heard a song and they want to do a song like that. The notes, the harmony. Melody writing is something that we're going to talk about in a minute. Actually, why don't we talk a little bit about melody? So one thing I would like to do is to introduce students to the different modes pretty early on, because they get pretty excited that this is something that they didn't learn in school or whatever. It's something that's new, and you say, oh, these are the modes from the Middle Ages, and they get all excited about that. Like Dorian mode seems to be a very popular mode with my students. I don't know why, but they really seem to like it. So I'm just going to screen share here. I think I'll be able to do that. This is in your handout too, but here is the modes and melodies, and this can work with intermediate or with advanced students. I guess if you've got a really bright elementary student, you could do that too. But I have the different modes there. So there's Ionian and Dorian and Phrygian. I go through each one. And of course, you'll notice that the left hand is playing fifths in whatever mode we're in. Now they can change that throughout the piece, but the idea is, it begins in Ionian, ends in Ionian. Of course, that's major. So you got 8 measures, and I think I made this little worksheet for my students, and they're short, right? It's 8 measures. That's all they have to do is write 8 measures. If they want, they can keep the left hand the same the whole time. Sometimes I'll give them parameters. I'll say you can only use quarter notes and half notes. Sometimes I'll say I want it to be all 16th notes, make it really energetic. So for Dorian mode, maybe something like that. And that way they also they can create their own exercises too with that. So that's a worksheet that I hope you might find helpful. I usually have them either start on the tonic, I think it was supposed to be mediant, or the dominant. So that can be fun. And like I said, it's so versatile, that you can say, use only 16th notes or only do this. So giving them parameters I found can be really helpful, because if you just give them a page, most of my students, it's like, what do I do? It's not like a blank canvas somehow. It's really strange. So giving them the parameters, saying, here are your things that I want you to follow. Here are your little rules to follow. You maybe don't call them rules, but it's part of the assignment for them with that. So that can be one strategy. And the other strategy is filling in the notes. So here I call them scale variations. So the idea is that they're filling in the missing parts of the scale. You could even do this, I suppose, with late elementary students. And then notice the left hand's missing, so they can add different chords to the left hand. So the idea is they start to write things in. They can pretty much figure out what a scale is going to look like. They can figure out those notes that go in between. So that's a good way to get them just to start writing. And again, this is just writing by hand, but let's see your left hand. Then you say, okay, well, experiment with different chords. Let's say the first one is in C major. Okay, well, and then you can say, okay, now that's C major, right? Now look at the second one. Let's say, what if, even though you're starting on C, what if you start in A instead in your left hand? And you can start to tell them, that's one of the great things about being a composer. You can change one thing. How different is it to start on C and have a C major chord in your left hand? What if you start on C and you have an A minor chord in your left hand? And then you can start to kind of talk to them a little more emotionally about the music. How does that change? And some might just say, well, that's happy and this is sad. But you can explain to them then, look how much power you have as a composer. You can change a whole, your whole mood just by one chord. And then I added Lydian too at the bottom there. Sort of Lydian, you could call it. But so that can be a fun bouncing off point, I think, for students, filling in the scales and just showing how powerful it is to just change chords in your left hand. And then they're starting to get the left hand chords down. suppose you could start to introduce cadences as well. 5, 7, 1. And you could use that to start working a little bit more on their theory knowledge. But again, you're not saying, oh, this is a theory assignment, because then, oh, theory, I don't want to do theory. So that can be a good thing to do with that. So filling in the notes. And that's something you could do on NoteFlight. You could create your own worksheets in a way for your students by doing that. And you could do, like I said, different modes, which can be great. And that way you're introducing them to something that they wouldn't have otherwise learned. The other thing that I've found really useful is using visual art, using stories as inspiration, because I think that really is, it's something that they can, let's say they've just read Lord of the Rings or something like that. You can say, okay, well, why don't you write you like Lord of the Rings, so what's a piece of music you could write about Sauron, the bad guy, or if it's the Avengers, we write a song about Thanos, you know, and just saying, okay, well, you could just start by improvising if you want, you know, if you're a bad guy, you're probably not going to do, you know, it's going to start down here. So, you know, let's pick a key. So you can use that storytelling. You say, we're going to tell a musical story with this. And then kind of circling back to what Jonathan was saying about, you know, having a trajectory to it. That's great. Stories have trajectories, a clear beginning, middle, and end. Well, most of the time, most movies do, or stories. So that can be helpful too, because you can get to nourish that creative part of them, and then, you know, let the inspiration bubble up. Because when the inspiration dries up, what do? And that happens for me a lot more than I would like, especially over the past 11 months. It's like, I should have been composing symphonies. You know, at the beginning of this, I was like, oh, I'm going to compose and get so much done. But I found the inspiration was drying up. So I would use, you know, what movie have I seen recently? What painting do I really like? And then base a piece off of that, or even just a starting point. And then that kind of goes back to, you know, those 3 things that are necessary. That has to do with not only creativity, inspiration, but connection. Because think about it, if a student writes a piece of music about, I don't know, they saw the Spider-Man movie. All their friends saw the Spider-Man movie, and they say, oh, guess what? I wrote a piece about this. And then they start to connect with their friends in a new way. And then their friends get inspired and say, oh, maybe I want to compose. So I think that can be really exciting. And to watch that, I've seen that happen a little bit. To watch that as a teacher is really, it's awesome in the best sense of the word. So using stories, art, imagery, the workshop that I did at the Brandywine River Museum, that's how I had them work, these young composers. I said, pick a painting. I want you to write a piece about the painting. And came up with some really creative and exciting and innovative pieces of music based on artwork. So that's another strategy too, and that can apply not just to intermediate students, but elementary and advanced students. There's this is actually one of my adult students that discovered this, and I just think it's somewhat related. I guess he watched some Tom and Jerry cartoon or something like that, and he's like, oh, I decided to do Cat and Mouse Hannon. And I was like, what are you talking about? You know, I was thinking Cat and Mouse Hannon. So he starts playing. He goes, all right, here, just listen. You know. So, and I thought that was so creative. So you can even do that with exercises to get them to, I guess you could call it improvising, but they're also doing something different, and you could have them write it out. And so now I've got a bunch of my students doing Cat and Mouse Hannon. Now, it's not great for rhythm, I'll tell you that, but you know, it kind of defeats the purpose of having a nice, smooth, even 16th note exercise. But I just thought I would mention that. It was pretty interesting, and you can apply that to any of those Hannon exercises for fun. Okay, good. And then kind of thinking up a little bit more about advanced students, and I think using pieces of music that already exist as bouncing off points can be really great. And also looking at what makes a good melody. There's a great video of Leonard Bernstein. I'll send a link to that. He talks about what makes a great melody. If you haven't seen it, it's a must watch, where he talks about that very thing. But I thought we would look at the New World Symphony theme, and this is a great one too because it is in one of those early Faber books, and I think it's a great melody, and we can learn a lot from it. And of course, the students too, asking them questions and getting them to think about, okay, what makes this a great melody? So here, I'll just play through the first part of it, Now notice I don't have the chords written in there, so that's something they could do. If you wanted to make this into a worksheet, you could. And I can send this out if you'd like. I didn't include it in the handout. What makes it a good melody? So I might ask the student, let's look at the rhythm. What do you notice? Well, we got dotted rhythms, we got eighth notes. So ti, ta, ta. There's a little bit of ta, ta, a little bit of a lift on the and, 1, 2, and 3. So they say, oh, well, the rhythms are similar. He said, that's good. That's something that the audience can latch on to. Let's look at the contour. It's a skip. What would it sound like? Say, what would it sound like if it was just a step? And they'll say, well, that's really different, right? Well, why is it different? Isn't it amazing that just that skip changes the whole trajectory? And I think it's at least I think for me, I sometimes overlook the power of just little changes, little things, and I think that just zooming in, just focusing in on even this one little change can make a whole different piece. So skipping up and then going down. Why does he end on D instead of C? Because we're not home yet, right? We're not rested. He repeats this. And then change. Oh, wait a minute. He's not going to G there. Now he's going to D because he knows he's taking us back home. So even discussing melodies like that with the students can be really powerful. And then you can take that and say, all right, now let's compose a melody. We're going to use the same rhythm, maybe a different key. Let's say maybe we'll go to E major or F major. And let's say just use the same rhythms. Yeah, and it might not come like naturally to them, but you can work them through it and say, use the same kind of contour, and that way you can learn from one of the greats, right? You're learning how to shape a good melody, and that can be a really good exercise. I've often found for me it's a good exercise for me too, because it's really hard to write a good melody. I don't know about you guys, but I have trouble writing good melodies, and so I often look at what are some of the best melodies. There's plenty of that to go around, and that of course requires listening too. It's good for the students to listen. I give my students listening assignments. Often I like to give them maybe the works are a little too big, but I gave one of my students, I said, listen to part of the Missa Solemnis, and the student was 10 years old. Maybe it was a little much, but just one part of it. And then sometimes they get really excited, and I say, okay, list 3 things you noticed about it. And so that also can channel into the creative process too, because that goes back to that number 3 thing that's needed is connection. So when they're connecting to composers of the past, composers of the present, they feel kind of excitement, almost a kind of musical kinship there, if you will. That's great. Would be nice to have this if you can add to the handouts. I will do that. Yes. Elaine said, my teacher in college used to all those things that solidify the musical idea. Musical glue. I like that idea. Yeah, Elaine, musical glue. Yes, we need musical glue. I love that. Good. Yes. And then thinking about other, pieces of music that they could use as bouncing off points. Let's say the student really likes the Moonlight Sonata. Okay, let's say they've played the Moonlight Sonata. You can talk to them about, why do you like the Moonlight Sonata? If you've noticed, I'm definitely a big fan of, I like to question my students a lot, and some of them, they get annoyed by that, but that's okay. They're learning, I hope. So, why do you like the Moonlight Sonata? Oh, it's famous. Oh, it sounds pretty, whatever. I said, well, let's look at just the first 4 measures of it. Okay. First of all, what would change? I think it's always good to try to, and Brendel talks about this in his book. If you haven't read it, please check it out. Alfred Brendel's Musical Thoughts and Afterthoughts. And he talks about this idea of co-composing, looking at pieces of music and kind of figuring out, why didn't Beethoven do this? Why didn't Beethoven do that? So why didn't Beethoven just use the right hand in root position? What? That doesn't even sound like the Moonlight Sonata. So you could ask the student, why do you think you did that? Let's try it. First inversion. Second inversion up here. No. Now I know why Beethoven wrote that. So it's a way of getting them to think differently. And I think, you know, incorporating that into the creative process is good, because then the next step you could say, all right, I want you to compose a piece that's a little similar to the Moonlight Sonata. Let's use a second inversion chord. But maybe you change something, like you play it higher up. Maybe let's not have it as dark. Let's say it's a little bit more, we want it to be more about a sunrise instead of the moonlight. So, all right, well, let's see. Change it to major. And maybe instead of octaves in the left hand, we do just single notes. And then you can, so you're using things of the past and bringing them into the future, that kind of thing. And using those musical tools, you know, what's the rhythm, what inversion you're in, so that they can choose. Of course, that's, you know, more advanced. If you got some students, let's say someone's working the revolutionary etude, you know, you could say, all right, well, let's, and maybe they don't even have to necessarily write it down. I could help write it down on Finale for them, because let's say they really know how to get around the keyboard, and I think we all have students like that, that they can improvise like nobody's business, or they can just go to town with something. So let's say, okay, well, let's change it to major. They might have fun with that, and then you could, they could add something different with the right hand. So they can have a lot of fun with that. And that's a game too. Another strategy I like to play with my students is change the major to minor, and the minor to major. And they sometimes get a really big kick out of it. You know, things like... which can be really funny, and it's something that you can do. You can say, well, look, that's a variation, right, on a piece of music that you might like. And that's also, you know, a good strategy for pulling their interest, something that they already like, they already love this piece of music. And it doesn't have to be something they're playing. It could be a pop song, I guess. You know, if they like to listen to a popular piece, sure, you could use that as a bouncing off point. Just not Let It Go, because that rhythm is so hard to teach. I don't know if anybody else has a problem with teaching Let It Go. If you have a suggestion for how to teach rhythms in that piece, especially for elementary students, I'd love to hear it. So that's another one of those practice strategies. And then one last one for the advanced students is starting a piece of music actually together. So I have one student that I gave them like the first 4 measures of the piece, and I said, I'm going to write my own piece based on these 4 measures, and you're going to write your own piece based on these 4 measures. And so there's kind of a nice little, it's not teacher-student, it's artist to artist, composer to composer. And that can be things that they find really exciting. I'll even do that sometimes with my little students, my little 7 or 8-year-old student. Of course, that might be a graphic score. I'll say, well, Miss Jennifer's going to write a graphic score, and you're going to write a graphic score. And they have a little sense of confidence about that, a little sense of pride there in a good way with that. So that can be good too, is to utilize, you know, give them 4 measures or something like that, and that can be helpful. I enjoy using Museum Masterpieces by Kath. Ooh, I don't know that one, Carol. Museum Masterpieces. I like that title. Yeah. Oh, she's showing me the book. Yes. Nice. There you go. I'll have to check that one out.
It's in all levels. It starts with an A and B and a C book, and then this one happens to be book 3 for intermediate, late intermediate, and there's also a book 4, but that's on my piano. I find them delightful because in the middle, there are actual pictures from museums.
Oh, that's great. I love that.
Go with each piece, but if you want to, I find that they jumpstart conversation with the kids that I use them with. And I had forgotten about it until I reorganized the studio and I found them in my box. So I kind of have
Wow.
missed them.
Oh, that's
But
great. I
they're-
like
they're-
that. I like that it has the pictures in there too. Oh, that's wonderful. And one other strategy, you can use this for intermediate and advanced students as well, is taking a melody that already exists. I'll share my screen one more time here. Finale. What's your finale? That's the New World Symphony theme. That's not what I want. Let's see. Can everybody see that? It's a chant. I don't know if that's working. Yes, good. Okay, so this is by St. Thomas Aquinas, one of my heroes, another one of my heroes in a different.
No, Jennifer, it's the New World Symphony.
Oh no! All right, let's try that again. Thanks, Miriam. There we go. Yes. So you can give them a melody. In this case, it's a chant melody. Okay, and it doesn't move around a whole lot, but you could say, all right, it's kind of similar to the other thing with the modes, teaching the modes. You can add different chords to the left hand. And have them experiment with that. Which can be really helpful. And again, you could give them to this, actually, you could just give them as a PDF if you want, and they could write it in physically with their hand, or I could send it to them in Note Flight or Finale, or we could do it at their lesson, which can be helpful too. And then if you want to get really experimental, you say, okay, I want you to do some hand crossing stuff. So we'll do... So that way they're learning to cross different registers, and of course that's a nice way to teach hand crossing as well. So that's another strategy you could use for advanced or intermediate students. Let's see, any other things I wanted to share? I think also sets of variations. It's good for if one of the students have a melody that they like, even. Let's say, okay, well, why don't you turn that into a waltz? They can do that too, changing things from 4/4 to 3/4. That can be good too. And then you can, I haven't even talked about introducing form. I guess that's something that I would work with more with my advanced students if they're working on more than just a one-page piece or something. Working on learning your ternary form, sonata form, all that stuff. But I have to say I'm not very successful at writing sonatas myself, so I don't expect my students to do that. I can only do very simple sonatas. My David Brown's still trying to get me to write a sonata successfully. I still owe him that, but anyway. So teaching form to the advanced students is helpful, but I tend to do that to teach them the forms anyway. I'm sure most of you do too, with their piano lessons. So any questions? I know I kind of went through a lot of different things there, but I hope that you found these tips and resources helpful. Yes, Donna.
Hi. So are you teaching composition to all your students? And if so, how are you structuring your lessons?
I try to do that with all the students. I am, I'm still learning. Doing this presentation has made me feel more so that I need to do that with every single student. I try to start pretty early on with the little ones, and I think sometimes I get so involved with once they get to intermediate level with the playing that I don't keep an eye on the time. But I say that I do like to try to save even at least just 5 minutes as part of their lesson to devote to, hey, did you get that other measure written? And that the Faber books do have some, composition exercises in there, which is good. And sometimes I'll use that and say, okay, that was 8 measures. Now let's make a bigger piece out of that. So I might use that as a bouncing off point for their composing. But sometimes it's 2 measures a week. Hey, that's good, or 2 measures every 2 weeks, whatever I think can be helpful. But yeah, but with my composition students that aren't my piano students, they have long lessons. The advanced ones have 2-hour lessons because it's just there's so many things to talk about, and it requires a lot of time and energy and discipline. I'll tell you what, I get exhausted after teaching composition lessons. I feel like I need a nap because, especially my one student, he's so brilliant, but he talks so fast. He's got all these ideas, but he has trouble just writing them down. Yeah. Yeah, Jonathan.
You gave some ideas about, with young students, alternatives to notation, but let's say a student makes up a little piece. I'm thinking a young elementary level student, they make up a piece that uses a graphical score. Do you then help them to write it down, or is that not important?
Usually if I'd say if they're 8 and above, I will try to write it down, and I won't necessarily I might just do that for them. Let's say I record it on my phone, and then I'll write it out and say, wow, look at this piece you composed, and then maybe then once we start working more on writing things down and they get more familiar, they're better at doing that, then we would write it down.
Jennifer, could you explain how you use the modes and what they are exactly?
Yeah, so the different modes, there's let's see, 7 of them. So I'll introduce the students. So you got Ionian, that's just C up to C. So these are it's easy just to use the white keys when introducing these instead of trying to transpose them. Ionian is major, same thing as major. Dorian is just D up to D with the white keys. And I can send you the
yeah.
You have the handout for that, right?
I'll have to download it. Yeah, you put it on your website, or you send it as a.
I'll send that. Yeah, what I'll do is I'll send it with the scales filled in for you.
Okay.
Yeah, and then so each one basically it's just the white keys from E to E is Phrygian, F to F is Lydian.
Well, what I'm thinking is I have trouble getting people to play scales, so I'm looking for any way I can to teach people how to play scales. So why not compose with them?
I think that's great, yeah, and like I was saying, it's a great way to introduce something that they might not have heard before. They say, "Oh, what's Lydian mode?" And you can say, "Hey, there's some really great pieces of music that use Lydian mode." Maria, I just met a girl named Maria. You say,
right,
Lydian mode, and I think the modes are making somewhat of a comeback. I'm noticing that they're used a lot in film scores, which is kind of cool. I like.
Yeah.
It's going back to
what's interesting is it parallels architecture.
Oh,
Ionian and Dorian are columns.
It's cool stuff. Yeah. That's great. Yeah, Donna.
We appreciated your modal composition. Jennifer did a terrific job for Lower Brandywine's 300th anniversary last year. That's where I'm music director, and she, that modal thing, that modal anthem was really nifty. I wasn't expecting it. It was really terrific.
I'm glad they liked it. I can't wait for it to happen live in person.
Yeah, we can do it a little bit better.
It was great. That was great. Yeah. Any other questions, comments, suggestions, or things? Hey, I tried that didn't work. I
don't know.
All right.
I think the biggest thing that we have to do as teachers is to keep ourselves open to trying something that might prompt a child, a student, no matter what age, to be a little more. And I think we all fight with how do we get all of this into a lesson. And my goal is to have my students be the best readers they can be. A lot of times I equate it to reading a book, that if you can pick up a book and read it from the first page to the last page, you've accomplished something. And when you pick up a music book, whether it's Piano Adventures or what, you are able to process your improvement or just continuing success is that you finish the 1A, the 2A book, and you get to go to the 2B book, or you finish a piece and you go on. And sometimes I think the student is a little hesitant to ask you the question of, well, how can I do this myself? And as we sat here, Jennifer, I suddenly had the inspiration that for some younger students, perhaps the way to do, because they like to draw pictures, is to we challenge them with drawing a picture for you. Now, granted, this will work better when you're in the same room together, not necessarily on FaceTime, but to have them draw a picture, then talk about the picture and take that picture they create and do step by step and move them from the picture, the idea, into actually writing down a note that that describes how they feel about their picture, happy, sad, or whatever. And I can see how you could incorporate, especially on the elementary level, of what you've said. I have to say, I'm not that good at composition, but on the spot drop, if you've got something you want to do, you've got to put yourself out there as a teacher too and try it, because you're the one that's guiding that child. But I have this thought that, most kids like to draw pictures when they're little. And I feel like you really have to get them to write it down and see it before you can really, I don't want to turn them into video geeks too soon, because I think that they stop thinking with their brain and they want everybody to do it for them, rather than doing it for themselves. So I feel like the need to be able to write their notes, to write down their answers to a theory question that can maybe jump over to a composition exercise. I think that we have to be very, very, very cautious to make sure we don't jump over a step of development. And that's in having them do the task of picking the pencil up and writing it down.
Yeah.
But anyway,
I think that's great. And going back to Mr. Rogers' point, right? You've got to do it, right?
You've got to do it. That's right. And no matter how old I get, and I don't like to use that word because it's a three-letter word and I don't use three-letter words, but there's always value in doing it for yourself. Mm-hmm. And if anybody told me a year ago that I'd be teaching 25 students via FaceTime every week, well, then they were crazy. But we all learn, and we all learn to do things differently. And it's through presentations that you, Jennifer, have given us that make it possible.
Oh, well, I'm glad to have everybody's thoughts and advice and suggestions and everything. And I guess just on a final note, and one of my students introduced me to this Netflix show called Julie and the Phantoms. Has anybody heard about this? Okay, you gotta look it up, because it's I'll write it and it's about this girl that she composes music, and I'm like, oh my God, something on Netflix that's not full of garbage, kids don't get access to like really wholesome things. So check it out. Yeah, it's called Julie and the Phantoms, and I've only seen one episode of it, but there's this one part of the that I saw. This is a piece. It's called Wake Up, and she's sitting at the piano. She opens the piano lid and she starts playing and talks about how amazing it is to compose music and share it with people. And I thought, how awesome is that? It's written by the same people that did the High School Musical and all that stuff. And I think I'll put a link. Actually, maybe I can just do that quickly. I'll put a link. There we go, to the YouTube video. So check that out. It's. I mean, I tend to get. I don't mind cheesy stuff. It's a little cheesy, but I just thought it was neat that there was a Netflix show about a girl that composes music for her in a band. I thought that was pretty cool. So, kids are so visual, and anything that they see affects them. So, you might check that out. So, very good. Well, thank you everyone for being here and sticking through the whole time. I appreciate it, and I hope that gives you some things to try it with your students.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jen. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Great.
Very nice.
Thank
Yeah.
Thank you, Jen. So glad we got you to present.
Yes, thanks for pushing me, Jonathan. That was good. I learned a lot too.
We'll
That was
keep pushing.
very, very full of beefy ideas, very meaty, and certainly, even if we don't normally do composition or lessons, I'm sure we can take at least one thing from this today and try it with our students this week. Yeah, it's really very appropriate. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jennifer. It was
Thank you.
awesome.
Thanks.
And everyone, just don't forget about next month. We have a meeting. It's Felicia is going to be presenting. Different trains for different brains. Sounds
Oh.
very, very poetic.
Nice.
Excellent. And Miriam, I think you're doing the 5 minutes, correct?
No, I think you are. I already did
Okay,
mine.
I'm going to do it. Okay, I'll do it. Got it. Okay.
Right,
Very
and I
good.
guess that'll be our last meeting, because then the one in April is the master class at Westchester well, not at Westchester University, but online with Westchester University. That's in April. And then in May we have our last meeting in May with the teachers recital. Don't think it's going to be a luncheon, because I think we're just going to have to do the recital online. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts about that, but I don't think that we should be gathering at a house even in May. Don't think we'll be ready to do that yet, unfortunately. But I think meeting online and playing for each other, whoever wants to play, it'll be kind of like a large primetime players. But a little bit more of a slightly formal recital, perhaps, in a way, as we normally do, plus a meeting. Our meeting. So, does anyone else have anything to say before we finish today? I think I'm so pleased. Thank you, and it was really great to see so many people join us today. I think it's a record turnout so far this year. So, really glad. So I'll see you all.
All right, thank you.
Next month.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
A lot of great
Donna
ideas.
and
Bye.
Jennifer
Bye.
and Miriam. Thanks to everyone for coming.
Bye. Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Thank you.
Jonathan,
Yes.
can you
Take
just
care.
remain for a moment?
Oh yeah, sure.
I have a question for you. Are you still considering the position?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I'm leaning towards saying yes.
That would be wonderful. I'm glad you're leaning.
I spoke with Jennifer. I just wanted to ask her, what do you plan to do as president, and how would I be of help to you? I found we were very much on the same page. We both want to turn our attention towards membership